names in collecting on stage this morning, and we're so pleased to be able to do this. It's one of those great things as a part of the Petersen Automotive Museum that we get to do, and it's also largely because of the great membership that we have, our checkered flag members. Thank you so much for coming and joining us this morning. But also a very special thanks to the folks at Bonhams for hosting this event, allowing us to come in. It's a perfect way to start the day, especially hearing from some of the real heroes in the collection business. Before we get started, I'd like to say a shout out to our board member, Mark Mitchell. Mark, please give us a hello. And it's my pleasure also to introduce the chairman of the board at the Petersen Automotive Museum, a rancher, a real cowboy, a racer in vintage cars, the chairman of the 1199 Foundation, actually the chairman founder of Moto America, the North American Motorcycle Road Racing Championship, who's really helped save road racing here in America. Let me introduce Richard Varner.
Thank you, Terry. I'm living proof you should never go to the bathroom at a not-for-profit board meeting, okay? Thank you. That's never, ever. Anyway, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator today. If you know anything about McKeel Hagerty, what you know is that he's totally committed, he's always in, and he's in deeply. You know, for example, he's only got a few things going on right now. Besides a little insurance company called Hagerty, he's also taken over the ownership of Amelia Island, the Conquerors of America, DriveShare, which is his new vision, the Hagerty Foundation, the Greenwich Concours, California Melee. He's on the board of the Petersen, of course, and on the board of the LeMay. So there's probably no one more qualified and more at the epicenter of our enthusiast hobby than McKeel Hagerty. And so I'd like to now introduce McKeel and have you welcome him to the conversation.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Rupert, and everybody from Bonhams. I think at the end we'll have you come up and talk a little bit about how you're thinking about this week. It's really exciting to be here. Isn't it great to be together again around great cars and with all of our friends? Last year was a long wait. Lots of energy on the peninsula already. If you haven't noticed, there are lots of people out. There are, many great auctions. There have been panel discussion. The races are going on. It's good news. And I'm often brought in to talk about like the statistics and the size around the automotive world. And as I often have to explain to people outside of it, it's larger than people think. It's, yes, contrary to popular belief, there are younger people who are interested in cars and the future of the car world, and we'll hopefully get that out of our esteemed panel a little bit here today. And actually the future is really bright. So there's great stuff here. We're going to have some great discussion. And very early on here, we made a decision is that I was not going to read lengthy bios of each of our panelists, as we were just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, give just a 30-second view of their collecting history, the things they're interested in, and how they think we should be talking about the future of the car world. So I'd like to start right here with Phillip Sarofim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Phillip Sarofim. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I guess my collecting never really began. I guess it began is dreaming more than anything. And I was born with a Matchbox car in hand, and my tastes continued to evolve. But I think in the beginning it was always about dreaming. It's still about dreaming, and never stops.
And it might be a Duesenberg or a Myers-Manx. So we'll talk about the new project maybe when we get there.
Perfect.
Okay. So Bruce Meyer, everybody knows Bruce Meyer.
Bruce Meyer and enthusiast. Thank you. Love you all, because it's all about the people, and that's what drives me, and bringing people together and around the Petersen. So I love everything from hot rods to Duesenberg to dragsters, and the Myers Manx, and I'm just happy to be here and a part of this panel, and especially with two of my heroes right there.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bruce. So Miles Collier.
It's a pleasure to be here today. I think the way I would describe my travel through the world of automobile collecting is to quote a former girlfriend of mine many, many decades ago who said, "Miles, you can over-intellectualize anything." So, my journey has been one of not only collecting cars, but basically understanding their context, their origins, their meaning, their future, and so on. So it's going to be a great opportunity for me to talk a little bit about that today. Thanks.
Well, Miles, I must tell you, in the Hagerty organization, every now and then when we're trying to think about something deeply, we always think, well, what would Miles think about this? I'm sure he'd have a thing or two to say. So, Jon Shirley, great collector in many dimensions.
Thanks. I'm Jon Shirley. Happy to be here today. When I was a young man, my first car was Sunbeam Alpine. You can hiss if you want. Somebody waved their hand, thank you. And I've owned sports cars all my life. I've been collecting cars for over 30 years and rallying, racing, showing, and just generally really, really enjoying this car world. And my hope for the future is that it continues. That's my, I think that's where we need to go, right?
All right, wonderful. Okay, so we're gonna run through some questions and have some discussion here, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A or get thoughts from the audience, and we'll recirculate them. So this is a panel being hosted here at Bonhams for the Petersen, and the Petersen is really a landmark in the automotive world. It's one of the reasons I was so passionate to join the board. If you haven't been lately, you'll be blown away by everything that's happening there. How well they pivoted during COVID was absolutely remarkable. But what I want to start with is I want to ask Bruce Meyer. So Bruce, again, very eclectic, collector, interest in a lot of things, founding board member of the Petersen, created the checkered flag, one of the really incredible groups that gets together and do fun things around the car world. So Bruce, from the beginning, how have you thought about a place like the Petersen as a way of moving the car world into the future?
Sure. And I think last night was a good example when we had the designers. So at the Petersen, we started by celebrating our past. And by the way, Robert E. Petersen, I think most everybody knows, started Hot Rod Magazine. We could probably talk a lot about his history. So he was a neighbor of mine. We were in a group called YPO together. And by the way, McKeel was international president of YPO, and Richard Varner, our chairman, was in YPO. And I say YPO built it because Chip Connor and a lot of other YPOers have been involved. But, when we first started, it was just, I'm an enthusiast, and anybody that says get together and enjoy cars, I'm in. So Petersen found the building, and he said, Bruce, let's make a car museum here. And it just kind of evolved. I said, sure. And then, of course, he stepped aside, and here I am. But it's been a great ride, and we've been trying to appeal to every age group, bringing in a variety of cars. And we brought Phillip Sarofim's very involved as well. And we never know what Phillip's going to show up in or what company he's going to buy next or be involved. But it's a group of people, enthusiasts, and that's what brings us all together. And I also want to give an extra shout out to you, McKeel, because as you walk around the field today, you'll see more Hagerty pins on people that you didn't even know were involved in Hagerty. McKeel has started with a small insurance company in Michigan and grown to be the real powerhouse in our fabulous hobby, and has been enormously generous to the Petersen. It's the Hagerty Vault and so many of the activities. So I just want to give a shout out to you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Because you're the guy and the insurance guy. It used to be J.C. Taylor and a couple of these people that would forbid you to drive your cars other than to an event, and you're the guy that let us all bring the cars out and drive them, and supporting the museum and so many charities. So I want to say
Bruce.
thank you.
Well, there's nothing worse than an unloved car, so you got to get out there and drive them. So Miles, you think deeply about the car world, about the past and the future. When you think about, for a group like this, these are people that are going to be impacting the way the future of the car world lives. What's the time frame that we should be thinking about here? Are we just concerned about the very next generation, or should we be thinking about it 25, 50, 100 years out? How do you think about that?
Well, I think if we don't have the next generation taking care of these artifacts, we don't need to think 100 years out. But that having been said, I think one of the important things about the automobile is it's one of the important legacy artifacts of modernity. It's one of the defining objects of our culture and our society in the developed world. And as such, is worthy of respect, is worthy of preservation, from which future generations can benefit, both in watching them operate alive in the world, as well as in a more contemplative environment in a gallery or something where really important fragile automobiles ought to remain. So the time frame that I think about is generally 100 years out, but as I say, that's irrelevant unless we take care of the near term. And so I think most of our effort needs to be focused on how we engage the next generation in having an appreciation of these cars. And by the way, a lot of them do have an appreciation. It's just that not yet in the context of the automobile as something worthy of treatment as legacy.
All right, thank you. So I knew that would kind of blow people's minds. If you say 100 years out, it's hard to think about it. We had a discussion once looking at two kind of like cars in the Revs Institute, which is a car that was very, very much preserved, kind of carefully preserved on a daily basis. Then you had another one that has a lot more sort of replacement parts and is more regularly raced in vintage racing. Do you think that how should we think about this? You call it the use imperative, where we feel like a car must be driven, it should be driven to have fun. How do you think about those two objects when we think going forward? Is it okay to keep using the one and just keep replacing the parts and then preserve the other, or should they both just be packaged away and looked at in a museum setting?
Well, automobiles are active matter. Okay, that is, they are an artifact that was designed to function in some way, and indeed, you can't really understand something like an automobile as active matter unless you see it alive in the world, unless you experience it moving, unless you ride in it, unless you drive in it, and so on. So the idea that cars need to be active in order for us to truly appreciate them, I think, is an important concept. Now, that having been said, there are certainly some examples that, because of their historic importance, because of their shocking original amount of fabric that's in them, need to be treated with a great deal of discretion. But our automobiles are also archaeological artifacts. They are things from the past that have been brought through time for us now in the present with a view towards future generations. And that means that we need to respect each automobile individually. There is no prescription about, all cars like this should be in a museum, all cars like that you can use all you want. Automobiles are individuals just like we are. You need to, as the custodian and the caretaker, you need to design your own program for those cars. But you need to recognize that all use is consumption, and you need to come to some kind of resolution in your own mind as to how much consumption is acceptable. Now, obviously, some cars exist in large numbers, and we can use those up fairly happily. Other cars that are extraordinarily rare and unique, you need to be very, very considered about how much use you make of them. So all of this is very nuanced. There is no clear answer to things.
Okay, thank you. So,
can
John,
I ask a question?
Go ahead, please, Bruce.
Because Miles brought a car that I didn't even know existed to the historics, an amazingly rare car, one of two 8-cylinder Porsche Spyders, kind of RS, long wheelbase, or RSK rather.
RS61.
RS61. I mean, 8-cylinder. There's two in the world and the two that were ever built, right? One is at the factory and one is in your collection. What kind of thought process did you use bringing it out? Just to, I mean, I appreciate it because I didn't even know it existed to share it.
Well, the issue about using automobiles, as I just said, is every use is consumption, but offsetting that is, as I also said, it's imperative where it's ethically and morally appropriate to keep these things alive in the world. Now, this particular car, Dick Troutman had to remake the body on it. It's been extensively restored. There really isn't a whole lot you can do to it that's going to damage it as far as original content is concerned. And the thing to think about automobiles is they really have three different components to their identity. Okay, one is the design, which is immortal and unchanging. Okay, and that can exist as a digital file. It's how the thing looks, the engineering of the motor, et cetera, et cetera. The second component is its fabric. How much original content that was made back in the day still exists in the car. And third is, what is it like as a phenomenon? What's it like to drive? How does it handle? What does it feel like? And so on. So you have these three aspects of an automobile, and every car is a unique mix of those things. This particular car has lower degrees of original fabric, but its performance, its function as a phenomenon for people to experience is really, really good. And so we feel fairly comfortable about using a car like that. If I had a car that was really high originality of fabric, like our unrestored 917 that'll be on the Concours lawn, that's not going to go racing ever for obvious reasons.
All right, great question. So Jon Shirley, you have had an incredible car collection. You do. Your Best of Show winning Ferrari 375 is here, I think. I saw it earlier, so that's exciting. You're also, you've been an incredible art collector that you share a lot of your pieces with the world. But what you didn't say, and in your intro remarks, is you were president and chief operating officer of Microsoft, one of the great technology companies that's driven change into so much of our lives. And so much of what's happening going forward is what technology is doing to the next generation. So when you think about your career in these companies that have changed so much of how we think about the world, how we interact with each other, and then you think about great objects like the pieces of art that you own, you collect and share with the world of museums, your cars, how do we bridge the gap between the two of them? Is technology making cars less fun, or should we be thinking more positively about it?
Repeat the very last sentence. Yes, please.
So if you think about how technology is changing the world, and you think about how all these companies are changing the way we interact with each other, and yet you have these incredible objects like the best cars in your car collection, a car that won Best of Show at Pebble Beach. Should we be afraid of technology to bridge this gap, or should we embrace it and say, no, this is going to be great. We can bridge the gap.
Well, there's so much attempt at increasing the technology of automobiles right now. It's not just giving them battery power. It's also attempting to create autonomous driving. Would I ever get in an autonomous driving car? If it would take me into Seattle to a meeting and bring me back home, yeah, maybe. That's a terrible drive to go into the city from where I live. But I think that the technology efforts have a long way to go, except in the battery area. I think that's going to happen very, very rapidly. And I think that the greatest threat to what we do and what we enjoy, how we enjoy cars, is not going to be the technology of new cars. It's going to be whether or not there's efforts made to prevent us from driving our cars, whether it's fuel or whether it's simply saying that the Colorado Grand, we've decided you can't have one anymore. The state says or the government says. And I think that's something where we need to be as proactive as possible in making sure that we can still enjoy the cars, because my cars, I like to drive my cars. I really do. And I still, at my age, I don't race anymore, but I go to rallies. And we took our Took a Ferrari 166mm, 1949, a very, very rare, valuable car that won a great race with Luigi Chinetti. We took it to Italy, along with some other touring-bodied cars, and had 4 days of driving around Italy. I mean, that's, you know, and this is, like Miles would say, this is a super rare car. There's only 2 of these left. The other one is the great car that the Lees have that won Le Mans. But we take it out and drive it. And some Sundays, we get our little dog and we get in the car and we just take it out and drive it for an hour to keep it running. And I think that the ability to continue to do that is critical to where we go. The thing about technology that scares me the most in the area of collector cars is the technology that's being put into supercars today, like a LaFerrari. Are you going to be able to get parts and service for that in another 10 years or 12 years or 15 years? Our missing panelist today, who is out racing, Chip, sold his because he began to wonder that very question. Is this car going to be drivable in 10 or 15 years? And the wonderful thing about the old cars is that they're easy to service comparatively. You don't need any computers. There's no technology in them. So that's I think a very worry for what we do collect going forward.
So I think there's 2 good things to bookmark there, right? Regulatory risks is definitely there. You know, whether we have the permission to use cars publicly on open roads. That's one, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about. And that technology of later model cars, all the computer technology, all of the different materials, you know, battery technology that isn't completely up to snuff, maybe. That's interesting. So we'll pick back up on that. But Phillip, I want to get to you. You have a great background of very eclectic collecting, bunch of different cars, and right now you're helping to revive a brand.
But before we
please,
get
go
to
ahead.
that, on the technology front, I want to add one bookmark that we should be aware of, and that's that social media platforms, forums online, as well as gaming, are another technological aspect that is changing the world of collecting and bringing so much attention to collectors.
It's true.
So,
well, the 2 major just regular console game platforms in the United States, you know, so you have Microsoft Xbox, the Forza, you have Sony PlayStation, Gran Turismo. Both of those platforms have about 10 million users on them on a global basis. They're older than you think. So if you think of automotive media from a business standpoint, automotive media has kind of been on a steady decline for quite some time. The business model is broken. But the 2 gaming platforms are booming in almost every regard. And one of the things I recommend to anybody who has a car collection, if you have a little bit of space, go buy a Sony PlayStation, put Gran Turismo in there, and play around with it. It's amazing. And in fact, the history sections in Gran Turismo will just blow your mind how good they are. And you know, play with it and get, you know, just have that interaction. But think about it, 10 million people, pretty remarkable on both sides. So tell us about your latest project and why are you reviving this great brand for us?
Why is a good question. I think it all comes down to passion and fun. And Myers-Manx, I feel, is a brand that is all about fun, that was built on the shoulders of true motorsport accomplishments. The Myers-Manx Dune Buggy was the first car to win the Baja 1000 overall and beat the motorcycles. And I feel that the brand is all about fun. It's all about smiles per miles. And the journey all started with getting to know Bruce Myers, not this Bruce. And he was a wonderful person, very jovial, fun-spirited musician. And I think it's one of the few brands that just constantly makes others smile. It spreads happiness, it transcends social classes, and it brings people together. And doing something to keep that alive and spread that happiness and love is important to me.
Well, that's awesome. So when are we going to see some the new, latest, greatest And will it be electric?
That's a very good question. We will offer both gas-powered as well as electric versions. I think we'll probably have the prototype done at the beginning of next year for our electric version in our new platform. And I'm excited to share it with the world. So stay tuned.
All right, well, we can't wait. Thank you. So, Bruce, Southern California has always been one of the great car cultures ever, right? And going back to the earliest days, some of the best cars ever were delivered new to LA. You've found so many of those in garages through the years, and you've been a part of getting people started in the collecting world. But when you drive around Beverly Hills today, are you worried about Southern California as a car culture, or is it stronger than ever?
No, I think Southern California is stronger than ever. And I'm not worried about the car culture so much in Southern California. But I'm just following along with what Jon said. Most of my cars, are gasoline powered. They're not hybrid. And I know there was a big, obviously everybody wanted a LaFerrari or whatever, but I mean, in 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, will we have the technology to support those cars? And I think that's a really big issue, because the younger generation now have the latest and greatest, Lamborghinis and some of these very extreme cars, and they're not basic, a lot of them. And I'm just curious, what the future of that is, with battery technology and hybrid technology, and just even to get a car tuned today, you've got to have the program and all the electrical. So, I've kept mine pretty digital free. So
Analog.
Analog.
Keep it analog. Yeah, I get it. So is that, if just kind of maybe running down the group, is that one of the biggest risks with, the cars are cool, these modern cars with all their electronics, their performance is undeniable, but is it going to be this gap, this knowledge gap to keep them running? How does everybody view that down there? You're concerned about it, you might not own one. As we said, Chip Connor sold one of his, he's out racing today. Would that be your biggest concern, keeping that going? Or do we say, hey, look, the next generation's gonna be better with electronics than we are, they'll figure it out? So, Miles, how do you think about that era of cars?
Well, obviously, if you start unpacking that, that's a very, very complicated question. So I'm going to have to try and simplify it somewhat. The obvious points that I'm concerned with is not so much the obsolescence and deterioration of things like batteries and electronics, but the deterioration of the actual fabric of the automobile itself, the composite panels and so on. Now, some particular composites like carbon fiber seem to have good futurity inherent in them, but other things like monolithic plastics and other kinds of things are falling apart. And those are going to present extremely expensive problems for the restoration of those kinds of cars, even with the advent of 3D printing. Ultimately, we may say that the modern generation of high-tech cars are going to exist in the cloud more than they are on Earth, in the sense that you'll download whatever the data is about the part that you need, and then possibly you can then print it back out. And we may find that automobile manufacturers are creating heritage or legacy divisions that actually manage the software so that you can be licensed to make the bit for your car. Who knows? We're blue sky speculating here. The other problem that I think one addresses is what is the actual economic dynamic of how an object goes from being a utilitarian object to becoming a collectible object. Now, the definition of a collectible object is one that is being esteemed, saved, and preserved for its non-utilitarian function. It's being preserved for its aesthetics, it's being preserved for its historic importance, it's being preserved for the experience that it affords. And the issue basically is, will modern cars be able to be restored economically as they deteriorate as a usable artifact down towards junk, okay? Everything starts out as a usable artifact. Over time, in ordinary use, it gradually declines until it becomes rubbish. When it's rubbish and has no value, a number of eccentric collectors out there in the world, of which you are all examples, I'm an example, find these things and say, wow, that is a fantastic artifact. They buy them, and they begin to bring them back. And the thing switches from being rubbish to being essentially a durable, that is, something whose value is founded in non-utilitarian uses, and it becomes a collectible, and the value goes back up again. Well, in order to make that transition from rubbish to durable, even among eccentrics, the cost to rehabilitate that thing has to be reasonable against what the expected experience is going to be. If those lines never cross because of the incredibly complex, expensive technology, the thing will never get out of the rubbish heap. And that's an issue that needs to be thought about. So I apologize for rather an abstract,
No, that's good. That's good.
Complex idea, but that's something that is a real concern.
Awesome. So, Phillip, I'm just going to call it out. You're slightly younger than so many of the people that have great cars here around the peninsula. Are your peers into cars the same way you are, and how are you feeling about it with your friends and other people that are your age and younger?
I tend to hang out with a lot of people who share similar interests to me. So most of the people in my group are into vintage automobiles, but I think the passion and love is trending upward. I think, especially as it relates to the reach of social media platforms, gaming, and as I drive some of these vehicles around, like a Roof Yellowbird, which Bruce Meyer owns, one of the 29 cars. People go crazy, and it all relates to the gamification aspect of these vehicles with Gran Turismo, which made that car really unbelievably famous. I do have concerns with people younger than I am, because some of my friends' children are not that interested in getting a driver's license when they turn 16. I mean, I was driving when I was 8 or 12, and couldn't wait to do it legally. And
It's true. Yes. I mean, you got to get your hands on the wheel. Wayne Carini actually took a different angle that was fascinating this week. He has, nice collection of cars, and he was taking his 6-year-old grandson out for a drive in a Pierce Arrow. And his grandson said, Papa, this is the coolest car. I think it's just so great. And he said, well, guess what? I don't know what his grandson's name is. Guess what? It's your birthday, and I'm giving it to you today at 6 years old. And when he got home, he went into the safe, pulled out the title, and signed the title over to his 6-year-old grandson. And it was a very different approach. I've not heard anybody do that, because now when he comes over, it's going to be, Papa, when are we going for a ride in my car? And I think it's a really good way to do it. Why wait until you have to drive, until you start passing things along? It was a really interesting approach. So what are some of the things? You all have amazing car collections. What are some of the things that you see that you're doing or you think about to specifically bridge to the next generation? Do you just simply take a car out to a Cars and Coffee? Is it displaying them here and letting young people be around the cars? What are you doing, each of you, to think about that next generational stuff? So, John, how are you thinking about it with your cars and the next gen? What do you do? Bring them into the garage and say, "Yep, these are just cars, and here they are."
I have a grandson in Florida who gets up at 6 a.m. on Sundays to watch Grand Prix racing. He's a super fan of Max Verstappen. He has a complete setup, Xbox with the steering wheel and the pedals and the shift and so forth. And he loves to do that. And he is just about to get his first car, which he decided he wanted to get a Camaro. And, I worry that you see some children that just have no interest. Some boys have zero interest in cars. My interest in cars started as soon as And Uncle put me behind the wheel in his farm in an old pickup and put wood blocks on the pedals so I could reach them and let me drive the thing around. And that's how I learned to drive a shift car. I think that the gaming aspect of it is bringing a lot of kids into the car world because it's not very expensive, and as you said, there's millions of people playing these games. At Microsoft, there was a huge effort. In fact, one of the men who works for me used to work for Microsoft. He's here today. He spent a lot of his time going around the country and the world, actually, filming and photographing and recording the sounds of the cars that are in Forza. So if you're driving a GTO, you're getting the sound and the appearance of a real GTO, and it happens to be mine in this case. But there's many other cars in there that aren't mine. He came down, and I think he did some at your place. I'm sure he did. And I think that there is still interest out there, and I don't think that we're raising a generation of young people that aren't going to drive or aren't going to be interested in it. And if you go to Microsoft, within 15 minutes of Microsoft, there is every high-end car dealer that you can think of selling lots of cars. I mean, there's Ferrari and Lamborghini and McLaren and Bentley. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And they all moved out of Seattle, and they sort of moved over there because those people are buying cars. And so
there are just a few big companies over there in Redmond. So yeah, that's pretty amazing. So the game aspect, that's a great one for I think everybody to be thinking about. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Get some of those driving games in the hands of kids, and especially with Forza, they're real cars, embedded in the code. So that's fantastic. So Miles, how about you? You're passionate about this with the next gen. Like, what are some of the things you do?
Well, sadly, I haven't been able to romance my daughter into getting involved with cars yet. She's a high-level competitive 3-day eventer, so she has the adrenaline drive. She's completely nuts to ride a 1,500-pound horse at 30 miles an hour over 6-foot jumps, but can't get her into cars. But so what we do is we have a museum that's open to the public 3 days a week. Oftentimes, families come in with little kids, and when we see little kids, if they are particularly intrigued in a car, we'll open the door up and say, "Get in, sit in the thing." And this will even be some pretty precious, pretty rare, pretty fragile stuff. But you got to set the hook somehow, and if we can do that, give them an experience in something really unusual like that they didn't anticipate, I think that's a step in the right direction. Of course, we go to events like this. We had our McLaren F1 at Amelia Island, and there was a young man sitting there who was drawing the thing. He's drawing after drawing after drawing, and after a while we said, "Hey, would you like to sit in this thing? Get a feel for it?" And he said, "Oh boy, would I." We opened the car up, jump in there, and he got to sit in the car, as much as he wanted to. So you pick these little inflection points and you do what you can. And I think if we all do that, we'll move things forward. But the big issue to understand is that the next generation is going to become involved in cars on their terms, not on our terms. You got to figure out what their terms are, and you got to find ways to take advantage of that.
As I like to say, that's awesome. Thank you, Miles.
I think
you can wipe the fingerprints off of a car. You can take the blade of grass from the golf course off of the floor mats. The car will be fine, and you just got to get kids in it. Bruce,
I'm less concerned, and I just by a show of hands out here, I think it's in your DNA. We have 3 children that took on one, and I have friends of mine whose children have no interest in automobiles. And some that I was just born loving cars. So I'm just curious out here, how many were kind of born loving cars? Everybody, okay. So that I think is, it's just something that appeals to you. It was probably racing or competition that kind of piqued my interest, and I think that Netflix event, TV series has turned a lot of people on to Formula One, and I think it's museums, car shows, the social media, the different games. I think that's going to keep it going. I am not that concerned, and I also think it's not like they're making brand new 65 Cobras or something like that. It's a finite number of really great collectible cars, and I'm not concerned about the future. And of course, at the Petersen, we're constantly finding ways to engage young people. So that's, and thanks to you and all that you do and our chairman and executive director, but we're constantly thinking of ways to engage them and entertain them. But I think you almost have to figure some kids are going to get it and some kids aren't. You got to appeal to the ones that get it.
All right, Philip, what do you think? You going to put all those friends, kids that don't like cars in something fast and scare the pants off of them?
I mean, I think I would like to second Bruce's opinion and remain optimistic. I think what everyone is doing, whether it be with Microsoft Forza and the gamification of these assets, the Petersen Museum, getting people together at these incredible Hagerty events, all of it, I think, just creates such a familial nature to the culture and brings people together.
We have Cars and Coffee in Malibu that just kind of started as a few people getting together at a coffee place, and it is huge. And I would say, and you've been many times, and so many people out here have been, I would say that 3/4 of the people are in their 20s and 30s. And they're just loving the cars. Now if you drove up, if Philip, say, drives his Yellowbird or there's a Mura or something like that, they're very attracted to that. I think you came up in a Model T, they'd probably be less interested. But the interest is there, and I feel very good about the future. I also have concern about some of these extreme supercars, that are where the technology, I think, is going to be dated.
Oh, you should try to be the insurance company for some of these extreme supercars. Yeah. Hey, gee, I don't know how to drive it. I need 1,000 horsepower. Let's run it into something. Yeah. What a great idea. So what I often recommend is, like at Hagerty, we really believe you got to get people's hands on the wheel. So years ago, we started doing is buying every year a couple of just kind of inexpensive cars, easy to drive, and they're always ready to go. So anytime we have a visitor, they'll often say, gee, I wish I could go for a ride in a car. We're like, go for a ride. Don't you want to go for a drive? Take your pick. We're going out for a drive. Inexpensive cars, they have a lot of fun. Last year, 2019, we trained, I think, over 750 of our employees to drive a manual transmission. And it's just what you have to do. You just got to get their hands on a wheel. Have fun with it. And we've started doing it at a lot of our events. If you went to Amelia this year, we had a whole lineup of just, from Citroën Deux to, a bunch of weird stuff. And just anybody off the street, if they came up, they could make an appointment, sign up, and take the car for a drive. And that's what you need to do. It's okay. The cars will be just fine. It's not that mysterious. So I love some of the images here. The idea of just make it easy, emphasize the games, embrace them on their terms. That's some of the key stuff that we need to do.
And I bet there's some good ideas out there,
I bet there are. So, real briefly, we've got a lot of, and I want to get to some Q&A. We have a lot of knowledge of museum quality, best of the best cars here. Each and every one of you have amazing vehicles. What role can a museum play, or places like museums play, in keeping this magic going? And should museums evolve going forward to help bring those cars out to the world? So, what do you think, Bruce? You've done more, and then Miles and John.
Well, at the Petersen, we're constantly thinking of new things, new ways to appeal. And maybe right now we have cars of rock and roll. We have, all of a sudden I'm forgetting the guy's name from
James Hetfield is.
James.
We
Hetfield.
have some of his cars here.
So we have people that love rock and roll coming to look at the cars. We just keep changing up the look. We have Porsche Le Mans winners. We've got an amazing exhibit that just opened up with Juan Gonzalez's Formula One cars, and to see a Formula One car up close, a lot of people haven't, and to see the whole array of them and all the little nuances. So we continue, and Brian Stevens, who's our visual director, who's amazing, makes everything look sensational. So we just keep changing up and trying to hit every hot button that brings people in, whether it's movie cars, cars of rock and roll, Porsche, Le Mans winners.
The lowrider,
the
lowrider
oh my
exhibit was
God.
incredible.
And
yeah.
there's one of our most popular art forms are the lowriders. And when we do an exhibit, our attendance just goes through the moon. And that is a group that are so passionate. And it's a family group. It's usually the husband and the wife and the children and the grandfather come, and they've been doing it their whole lives. So, we look at all those, the donk, the lowriders, we're embracing all of them.
All right, so Phillip, you've been a lifetime checkered flag member. Like, how do you think about a museum, and how does it appeal to the next gen, and what else should we be doing?
I think it gets back to what I initially was saying. One, in the aspect of dreaming, I think museums help to inspire people, help them dream, can inspire great new ideas in people. For a collector, for example, museums can help to teach someone how to care for these examples, especially as new areas are being unearthed and people are coveting things that had not been paid close attention to, as Miles was pointing out previously. When you get to that inflection point, and that's when the restoration of vehicles really begins. I think the Revs Institute has done a phenomenal job trying to teach people how to care for these things, how to be safe about it, how to remove batteries.
Yeah, I remember seeing your battery room at the box where you keep all of the batteries, and I remember it was a curator, Miles, of one of the biggest collections in the United States. He's like, "You mean I'm supposed to take the batteries out of the cars?" He was a little surprised, but you're right. It's inspiration, right? It's inspiration to see the great stuff. Mm-hmm. So, Miles, no one has done more to create a high watermark for how cars are preserved and to steward them forward. Is that the highest and best way that we can think about, an incredible, institution that you've created? Is set that high watermark, keep it high?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, I think the role of museums are two or threefold. One is they're sort of the Noah's Ark of whatever discipline that they are dealing with, whether an art museum or, in our case, an automobile museum, where you want to have the greatest, the rarest, the most important automobiles preserved for the future. I mean, that's the whole point of these things. These are legacy artifacts. Secondly, I think the role of museums is to establish best practices. Best practices and here's where museums can do more, in using, in activating the artifact, but in storing it, in conserving it, and so on. And then, finally, museums are, of course, an educational institution. They're an educational institution that people come voluntarily to, that doesn't confer degrees, but if you do the right job, you use the passion for the object to educate people, and you sneak it in under the guise of candy-coated with entertainment. But, those three roles are extremely important. And then a museum does not exist in a vacuum. A museum exists, basically, think of it as again, Noah's Ark floating on a sea of enthusiasm by private individuals and private owners. And it is critical that ocean of private owners out there be incentivized to continue in their interest. And so the relationship between the museum and the public is a very, very important one for the long term.
Okay, well, I'm stealing the Noah's Ark thing. I love that, Miles, so it's just too good to pass up. So, Jon, we started off, you have an incredible car collection, but also an amazing art collection that you share with the world. How do you think about that idea of sharing cars with the world, sharing your artwork with the world? Is this what we should all be thinking about doing with the truly great cars?
Well, I'm kind of torn between the museum and the private ownership of these these artifacts, as Miles has called them, because once they're in a museum, and I love museums, I support museums, but they're not going to be used in the function that they were designed to be used, which is driving people around, transportation and enjoyment. So while I support museums and I do loan things all the time, I have a car in our local LaHaye Museum, and I loan my art a lot. And I have, those of you who don't know, I have a larger art collection by far than I do a car collection. I believe that there should be a lot of people like you, Bruce, and myself, who collect cars and try and maintain them to the standards that Miles has talked about, but use them and then pass them on to another person who is going to use them. I've sold more cars than I own today, many of them really, great important cars, and I believe that in most cases they've gone to people who have taken extremely good care of them and have continued to put them out on the road. And I think the most important thing that we need to do, especially in the United States, is to get more activities that are set up for people to go drive the cars. I mean, we have things like the Colorado Grand and the California Mule, but we need more of those. Which there exist in Europe and in England. There's far more effort to get the cars on the road and to do small events. And I think that if we can do that, and if museums can help in that aspect of it, and sort of get a synergy going, that is sort of where we need to go. Because if all of the cars the old valuable cars end up in museums, then they're never going to see the road.
I agree with you. Thank you. That's amazing. We do need to get them out on the road. I was thinking about, Highway 1 south of here down to Big Sur yesterday when we were driving in the Pebble Beach tour, and I thought about, can you imagine a worse experience than being driven around in an autonomous car on Highway 1? I could not. Well, for one thing, I think you'd get car sick right away. But the fun is having your hands on the wheel. So just a couple minutes left, everybody. We have some incredible wisdom. I'm sure you can get answers to almost any of your deepest question about the car world from them. But I'd love to open it up to any of you if you have questions or comments. And we have a microphone right over here. So if you just raise your hand, this gentleman will pass a microphone around right over here. And try to speak straight into the microphone if you can.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all your knowledge. And what about working on them? Don't we need to bring up a generation that can actually work on these vehicles?
So the skills, how are we going to bring up the next generation of people to work on these vehicles? What do we need to do about that?
Well, and that's a really good question, because that comes from the Schroeders, who have restored amazing race cars. We have an intern program at the Petersen, and we're constantly bringing young people in to work in our shop. McPherson College has that. So many, if I give any advice to somebody that's kind of unsure, I think trade schools are very important, because there's a generation that just don't know how to do anything, and I think that we need to put more emphasis in community colleges and trade schools and teach people, and I agree that's a big problem we have right now. A friend of mine had a 55 Ford in his garage, and it wouldn't start. He said, "Who do I call?" And I had to think, there's not a lot of people that can work on them. That's a big problem, and I don't know, Miles, you got a great crew.
Look, the maintenance of automobiles is sort of the vulnerable underbelly of this whole industry, of this passion. I refuse to call it a hobby, by the way. The issue is not so much the wide end of the funnel, where we're trying to get high school age kids to think about going on to a professional career caring for automobiles. I think that's relatively easy to do. Where the problem lies, to me, is at the other end of the funnel where it chokes down to a very narrow spout. And that's basically what I would call master classes, where essentially, there are plenty of competent mechanics out there, but the number who have the kinds of high-level skills to deal with the really complex issues, the nuances of this stuff, are growing ever less. I'll give you a local example. Some of you all may know him as Mike Pierce over here in Salinas, the Weber carburetor guy. He's about the only Weber carburetor guy left on the planet. And while, there are plenty of people who understand how carburetors work, the nuances of making a set of early worn-out Weber carburetors operate the way they did when new is understood by virtually no one anymore. And if that kind of skill isn't brought to those carburetors, your car isn't going to run right. So the issue to me is, how do we set up a series of academies of masters in residence, of other types of master classes for mid-career technicians who want to go to the next level and become masters themselves?
That doesn't sound like a solution, but just another question.
Other questions right here, sir.
Isn't one of the problems with getting kids interested in cars is that if you think back not that long ago, day in, day out cars that you would buy were interesting, and today's cars generally that most people buy are boring in design.
I lost the last part of it there.
I think, isn't it true that most cars that most people buy today, day in and day out, are boring? They have no styling compared to even 10 or 20 years ago. Why should kids get interested?
Yeah. So modern cars are boring, right? I mean, and they're not exciting. Why does it excite people in the same way it
And they
used to?
all look the same. They're all born in a wind tunnel. And I rented a Hyundai to come up here, and I'll tell you what, if you took the badging off that car, you wouldn't know what it was. It could be
anything.
Anything. I agree. And that's why it's important to treasure the old cars, because those are the ones that have the identity and.
But are there bright spots? I mean, Philip, we were talking about it with some of the new, some of the newer trends in kind of current cars, and that medium-term generation is interested in. Are there some cars that aren't, not supercars, but other things that aren't boring?
In terms of new cars or
Yeah.
older cars? Well, I may be biased, but I think that the smile machine known as Myers-Manx is certainly one. I've got to.
You may be biased.
You're biased, but it's okay. You put your
gotta
money where your
make
mouth
that
is.
plug.
So, yeah, the smile machine. Miles?
Yeah, look, I mean, the problem with modern cars is that they have been largely defined by their manufacturers as appliances, and they are unengaging. You cannot engage with them mechanically. I think that's one of the avenues that most of us came up who become to love cars, was the ability to get under the hood, to understand how they worked, to actually be able to work with them. When I was going to college, I had a summer job as a foreign car mechanic for 4 years. It was something that you could get your arms around. You can't do that now. Cars, in fact, you can't even see the motor. They come with vanity panels over the oily bits. And that's a problem. On the other hand, the bright lights to this are things like tuning culture, where younger generations are interested in automobiles. People are interested in romantic and fascinating and transformative and liberating and thrilling objects. And what is more than all of those things than an automobile? You just have to give people the opportunity to see that that is so. The tuners have found that out. So, mankind has been genetically programmed for literally from pre-humans millions of years ago to be a tool maker, to be ineluctably and inextricably entangled with objects with things. And there is nothing more seductive than a car if the next generation can find a way to engage with them. And sadly, the vast majority of products are thought about as as I say, as appliances, so there's no easy way into it. That's really the problem, and that's the hope of the old car. That maybe that's the way to engage people, because they can modify them, you can fool with them, they don't cost a whole lot of money, and so on.
John?
Well, I think part of the reasons that modern cars are boring is because federal regulations have made them have to meet so many different standards. And fuel economy makes them all get styled somewhat the same, so you lower the coefficient of drag. And miles, I agree 100%. If you can't get anywhere near the engine and you have no idea what's underneath there, I think that's a big put-off. But it is true that people are buying little Japanese pocket rockets and turning them into something else. And that, to me, is part of the. It's great that that's happening. That is, sort of the things that we used to do or tried to do when we owned cars when I was young. So I think there's still hope out there. I kind of worry what happens when everything has the batteries and nothing else. And then what do you do with them when it's all software?
Well, so Bob Lutz told me a couple of years ago, he said the biggest problem in the big three is focus groups. He said if you use a focus group to design a car, what you're going to get is an ugly car with 23 cup holders. And it won't sell. So we need to bring back a little bit of design. So that's all the time we have today. But is Rupert here? He might have stepped away. He might have stepped away. Okay, I'm missing Rupert. But what I'd like to do, because I do want to give our plug for Bonhams for hosting us here today, is thank you very much to Bonhams. Thank you to the Petersen Museum for being such an incredible organization, having people like Bruce, Richard, Terry Cargis back there, Michael Bodell. Yeah, I'm kind of blinded. Just an incredible team at the Petersen Museum, and thank you to our panelists. So John,
and
Miles,
thank you,
Bruce,
McKeel.
and Phillip. No, thank you. Have a great day, everybody. I understand you can still register to bid, and there are cars to buy. So have fun. Have a great weekend.